Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here for Doddle TV, and I am back again with another Adobe's After Effects tutorial, and in this lesson, we're going to talk about basic animation. We've covered getting footage into After Effects, how you're actually going to get footage out of After Effects to get back into your favorite nonlinear editing application, and now I thought we'd get in and talk about some basic animation. Now, of course, to talk about basic animation, we need to talk about creating compositions inside of After Effects. I'm going to show you how quick and simple that is. Then we're going to get in and do some very basic animations. But once you see how basic the animations are, and really that's the foundation as to how you're going to start doing most of your work, I guarantee you'll be up to speed and running in no time flat. Okay, short introduction here. Let's just get into Adobe's After Effects and let's get started. Okay, so let's Command and Tab into Adobe's After Effects, obviously Alt and Tab for all my Windows friends out there, and of course we know about getting footage into After Effects. So let's go about doing that. Again, multiple ways to do it, but what I'm going to do is simply navigate over to the project window. I'm simply going to right click, come down to Import, and I'm going to select File. What I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate here to my G-Speed Studio RAID. I'm going to come into my footage folder, and let's just choose some of my motocross footage here. I'm just going to choose about 3 or 4 shots here, not too many of them. We'll just select, sure, why not, the first 4. What I did is because I wasn't importing multiple clips, I simply selected the first clip, held Shift on the keyboard, went down to the last clip that I wanted, and now I can multi-select to bring in multiple files into After Effects. Now, of course, you'll remember to get some more information about these files, I can simply click on them. These files are DVC Pro HD 720p 60, and they're all the same type of clip. Now, one thing that I see a lot of people do to get themselves rolling is they're going to want to create a new composition. And what they'll do is they'll either navigate up here to New Composition. You'll see the shortcut Command and N on the keyboard on both Mac and Windows. Control and N, obviously, for my Windows friends. Or what they can do is they can navigate right down here to the Create New Composition button, which of course does exactly the same thing. But in some cases, this is where things sort of fall off the rails a little bit because they'll come into the Composition Settings window and they won't exactly know what to do. What's important to keep in mind about the Composition Settings window is you're going to want to have this window set up for whatever the most common media type that you're going to be working with in your timeline. Now for me, because I'm working with DVC Pro 720p 23976 frame per second footage, that's really what I'm going to want to set up in the composition settings. Now I'm going to show you the long way to set things up. Then I'm going to show you the short way to set things up. Okay. So the easiest thing to do right off the bat is to attempt to see if there's a preset for whatever footage you happen to be working with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the preset, I'm going to drop it down from custom, and you'll see that if I go through here, there is actually a preset for exactly what I need. DVC Pro HD 720p 23976. Now as soon as I do that, you'll see a couple things have now changed. Obviously my width and height have changed to reflect the 960 by 720 frame size. You'll see 960 by 720. You'll also see up here that I have a pixel aspect ratio of 1.33 to 1, which matches right here the pixel aspect right here of 1.33 to 1. My frame rate is now 23,976 frames per second, and in this case the duration is set to 515. Now because we don't know what we're going to want to have the duration set at, I'm just going to set that to be 10 seconds. Okay. Last but certainly not least, we have the background color that we're going to leave as black. Now we do have some advanced settings in here that we're not going to talk about just yet. There are a couple that we're going to talk about, but I don't want to get into that right now because I want to talk about the actual animation process first. So all I'm going to do is come back to the Basic tab. I'm simply going to click OK, and here's my timeline. I can now take any one of these clips and drag them and drop them in, and you'll see they fit the frame perfectly. Now this clip doesn't happen to be as long as the composition, but that's okay. We could always change that up by simply hitting Command and K on the Mac, Control and K on Windows to call back up the composition settings. Then of course we could alter the duration to be whatever we want. Now I did say there was a long way and a short way to create a composition. Now of course I just showed you the long way. So what's the short way? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this composition by simply selecting it, hitting delete on the keyboard and saying OK. Because to be honest, in most cases what I do is I'll take the longest clip, or it doesn't necessarily need to be the longest clip, it could just be the main clip that I'm going to be dealing with in my timeline. And just for argument's sake here, let's just pick 943. So all I'm going to do is simply take 943, and instead of coming down and clicking on the Create New Composition button, I'm simply going to take that clip, I'm going to drag it down and drop it onto the Create New Composition button just like that. And what After Effects is going to do is it's going to create me a composition with all of the parameters of the clip that I dragged and dropped onto the Create New Composition button, and even make the composition the exact correct length. Very cool. And a very good way to make sure that no matter what happens, your footage and your composition settings will always match each other. Okay, now before we move on to talk about the actual animating process, I do want to point something out. Now, editors that are coming from Premiere are going to be familiar with this, but if you're not coming from Premiere, if you're coming from an application like Avid Media Composer, there's a few things that you need to understand about clips that are dropped into compositions inside of After Effects. The main thing that you need to keep in mind is that there's a lot of parameters that are attached to each one of these clips that you can get in and alter without having to apply an additional effect to it. Media Composer editors are familiar with having to use the 3D warp tool as a secondary effect to do things like rotations and scale adjustments and things like that. In After Effects, like I said, we don't have to worry about that because you'll see that if I navigate over to the clip in my composition, you'll notice a little arrow here that if I click on it and drop it down, you'll see that we have some transformation options here. I can drop that down, and you'll see that we actually have 5 parameters that are actually attached to this clip. We have the anchor point, the position, the scale, the rotation, and the opacity. Now what's important to keep in mind is that there's actually a fast way to access these 5 different parameters. You'll see that if I want to adjust the position parameter, all I need to do is simply select the clip, hit P on the keyboard, P obviously for position, and the position parameter will be brought up for me. If I hit S for scale, scale will be brought up. If I hit O for opacity, no, not quite. It's not O for opacity, but T for transparency. To get up the opacity option, we can obviously hit R for rotation and A for anchor point. Now, of course, if you just wanted to see them all because you wanted to get in and make some adjustments, you can simply just drop that down to see all the transformation parameters. And of course, at any time, we could make an adjustment. Like if we wanted to make a scale adjustment, we could simply do that. No problem if this clip was just going to happen just to sit there in the middle of the screen. Now what I want to do is I want to zoom in on my canvas a little bit because it's a little bit far back. Now, of course, a few ways we can do that. I can simply use the mouse wheel to scroll in and out. But in a lot of cases, you want to make sure that your composition window is going to fit the frame. So right down here under my magnification ratio pop-up, in a lot of cases, I like to simply just say fit. So this way it's going to fit it to the top and bottom, or depending on the size of my composition, the left and right of my canvas. Okay? Okay, now at the heart of all animation is keyframes. Keyframes are what tells After Effects, or really any compositing or editing application, that you want to have a value changed across time. Now, how you add keyframes inside of Adobe's After Effects is very simple. All you need to do is come over to the parameter. Let's use scale as an example. Now, you'll see that I just grabbed it before and I just sort of made it larger and smaller. But if I wanted to get in and actually add a keyframe, all I need to do is simply navigate over to the left of scale to the little stopwatch icon. And if I click on that, you're now going to notice that inside of my actual timeline, and I'm just going to move the time bar out of the way here, that I now have a little diamond-shaped keyframe right here on the scale parameter. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add, let's just add another one here. I'm just going to add it for opacity. I'm not going to adjust the opacity, but what I want to show you in here as well is another great trick, because I just showed you about the shortcuts to get in and see anchor, point, position, and scale. But what if we wanted to see what parameters that we had keyframes attached to? Because that's always something that's very handy. If I had my clip here, and let's say I needed to make a quick adjustment or an animation to the scale of this, this element here, and I wanted to get in, instead of twirling everything down, because you've got to remember, some third-party effects have a lot of parameters. So I might just want to see the ones that I've applied keyframes to. Very simple. All I'm going to do, simply select that clip in my timeline, and I'm simply going to hit U on the keyboard, and After Effects will then show me only the parameters that have keyframes associated with them. Okay. So how do we get in and do an actual animation? Well, it's very simple. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to shorten this down a little bit, because I think 27 seconds is probably a little bit too long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command and K on the Mac, Control and K on Windows, and I'm just going to come in here. We'll just select 10 seconds. Okay, I think 10 seconds is pretty good. And what I'm going to do is just delete these 2 keyframes just for now. And let's just actually get this so that we've got a bunch of stuff actually happening in our shot here. There we go. Perfect. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Okay. And again, let's just put in our scale keyframe just like such, because what we're going to do is over time, we're going to do a very slow move on this shot. Now you see that we've zoomed back a lot. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back at 100, and we're just going to do a slow zoom in on this shot. Not too much, because obviously the more that you zoom in, the less the quality will be, because obviously we're blowing the image up larger than it actually is. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down to about the 10-second mark, and let's just do a very slow zoom. Let's just do it about, I don't know, let's put it at about 110%. Now what's going to happen is that as soon as I say 110 and I hit enter, because I already have a keyframe added at the beginning of my timeline, you'll come down here and see that a keyframe has been added to the end of my timeline. And if I drag through and you actually watch up here, you can see the bounding box that represents the edge of the frame of this clip. And you'll see that over time, it's actually being animated to zoom in on this shot. Okay, so you saw one way to add keyframes to create an animation. I added one keyframe at the start, I came down, I adjusted the parameter right over here on the left side of my composition, and by doing that, a second keyframe was added down here at the end where my time bar was. But let me give you another example of how you can add a keyframe very quickly and very easily. What I'm going to do is to delete these two keyframes. Instead of just circling one and deleting it, circling the other and deleting it, if I actually just navigate right over here to the scale parameter and I click on the scale parameter, it's actually going to highlight both keyframes, and then I can simply delete them. Now the reason I came back to the beginning was because I knew at the beginning the scale was at 100%. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set the scale to be about 40%. And I'm going to position my shot. Let's actually make it a little bit smaller. Let's make it about 30%, okay? And I'm going to position this frame outside of the actual composition window. But the best part is that again, I can see the bounding box of my clip. So I always know where the clip is, even if I can't see it visibly on the screen, okay? But again, like I said, I'm going to position my shot right over here, and I'm going to add a keyframe for position. Now you remember the shortcut to call up the position parameter, simply hit P on the keyboard on both Mac and Windows. I'm going to add a keyframe. Now what I'm going to do is just come right down to the end here again, and instead of coming here and dragging the X value or the Y value to create another keyframe, I'm actually going to grab the element itself, and I'm just going to drag it to another position where I might want it. Let's just say right up here. And again, by doing that, what I've now done is I've added another keyframe down here at the end. So again, what we've done is create a very basic animation. I'm just going to fit this to the window here. I'll just hit the spacebar to preview it. And there we go. Now, let's just talk about previewing here just for 1 second, because I did say, just hit the spacebar and it will preview it. But previewing, and I should point this out because this is very important, previewing is actually how you're going to get in and take a look at the animations that you've created inside of Adobe's After Effects. Now, the preview window has changed a little bit in the new version 2015 of the Creative Cloud. You'll see over here on the right my preview panel. Now, for some reason your preview panel is not over here on the right, don't worry about it. You can actually find it right up here under the window drop down, and you'll see it's located right here, Command 3 on the Mac, Control 3 on Windows, or you could just simply hit preview right there and the preview pane will appear, okay? Now you'll see the first thing that it wants to know is, well, what is the shortcut you want to use? Do you want to use the space bar, the numeric pad 0, which back in the day before the 2015 update, that was the most common way to preview your timeline. You could simply hit 0 to do a RAM preview. But because systems are getting much better now, you'll see the RAM preview when I hit spacebar is lightning quick. The question is now is that what do you want the preview to favor? Do you want it to try to get you the best possible frame rate? Or let's just say, I had a 30-second long composition that I wanted to try to preview the whole thing. Well, in that case, I could say, well, don't favor the frame rate, favor the length. And of course, After Effects will take that into account when it's previewing. Okay? Now you'll see, what range do you want? Do you want the work area extended by current? Do you want the work area or the entire duration? You can also choose to play from the current time or from the start of the range. Now, in most cases with these parameters, you're really going to only be, in most cases, adjusting the frame rate, and everything else is going to be left the way that it is. You'll see down here, of course, we can also get in, adjust the resolution, the frame rate, whether we want to skip frames or not, and even whether we want to turn the layer controls on or off. I'm just going to leave that as off for right now. And basically, that's how you're going to preview. Like I said, for me, I'm always accustomed to using 0 on the numeric pad, so I'm just going to change that to be 0 on the numeric pad, and you'll see again, if I come back here, and let me just make an adjustment here right in the middle. Again, to add a keyframe, all I'm going to do, simply click right in the middle just like such to change that, and I'm going to hit 0 on the numeric pad, and you'll see, boom, lightning fast preview of my animation. Very cool and very quick, which is important as well. Okay, so I've created a very basic animation. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put some footage in underneath. So I'm just going to take my composition here. Now what's important to keep in mind, and this is something that I love to do, a great trick for everybody, is that if I wanted this to appear at the top of my project window, all I'm going to do is simply hit enter so that I can get in and edit this text. I'm just going to add a couple spaces right in front of the 000943 Video Tracks HD. And as soon as I hit enter, it's going to place that composition at the top because it considers a space to be the highest alphabetical, if you want to call it a character, even though a space is not really a character, but a space will always override any other character that happens to be first, whether it's a number or a letter. So keep that in mind. Okay, so let's just take another piece of footage here. Let's just take this one. I'm just going to drag it and drop it in right behind. Now, of course, this is a little bit long, but that's okay, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to shorten my timeline down here, okay? But what I want to do is I want to move these keyframes back a little bit. The problem, of course, is that because I have 3 keyframes here, I actually want to adjust them all relative to each other. If I only had 2 keyframes, I would basically just take this keyframe and just drag it right back to here and I'd be good to go. But I can't really do that again, like I said, because I have this interesting little dip in the animation that I want to adjust. Okay? So all I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to select the position parameter to select all 3 keyframes. I'm going to select the last keyframe. I'm going to hold Option on the Mac, Alt on Windows, and as I drag back here, let's just do that again here. There we go. You'll see that what it's going to do is it's going to keep that first keyframe exactly where it is. And as I'm grabbing that last keyframe and bringing it back to where I'm going to want it to end right here, what it's doing is that it's adjusting the in-between keyframes relative to where they were back here. So that's a very great way. You'll see that I can drag this right back and it's keeping that middle keyframe relative to where it was when it was all the way down here. So of course, again, I can hold Shift on the keyboard to snap that to where my time bar is. And now all I need to do is simply, again, hit Command and K on the Mac, Control and K on Windows. Let's just make this 623 here. Okay, there we go. And now again, I'm just going to simply come back. I'm going to hit Preview, and there we go. Okay, very cool. Now, there's something else that I want to point out as we move along. I'm going to show you some very cool little things to take your work to the next level. And these might be little parameter adjustments, or, effects, things like that. And the first one that I want to show you is motion blur. Now, motion blur is actually a very interesting parameter. Motion blur, to be honest, is something that occurs. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon when you're dealing with stuff that goes zinging past the camera very quickly. And in After Effects, there's not really much adjustment that you need to make. I mean, obviously you do have a lot of control to get in and adjust it, but in a lot of cases you could just simply toggle it on or off, and it will actually just appear right in front of you. So how do we turn on motion blur? Well, it actually needs to come on in 2 places. The first thing that we need to do is we need to enable motion blur for the entire composition. Okay? And how we do that is very simple. You'll see it right up here. You can actually see the icon that looks like it's moving and being blurred at the same time, right there. Enable motion blur for all layers with the motion blur switch set. So what I'm going to do is turn that on. Now what's important to keep in mind is that nothing has changed. If I hit the space bar, we don't have any motion blur on this clip. Because what we need to do now is we need to actually turn motion blur on for every instance that we want to have it appear in our composition. So for example, if I want this clip, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to zoom in. There we go. I'm going to hit the space bar and hold it so I can reposition my frame here, just so that you can see what happens when I turn motion blur on. Like I said, I need to apply motion blur each time that I'm going to want to use it on each different clip in my composition. So all I'm going to do is head right over here to the exact same icon, the motion blur icon, and I'm simply going to turn it on. And as soon as I do, you're going to notice right away up here in my canvas that as soon as I turn it on, we now have some motion blur. Okay. Now, if we want to get in and adjust actually how much motion blur, the shutter angle that we're using, again, you can hit Command and K on the Mac, Control and K on Windows. And I said that I was going to talk very briefly about the advanced options. Really, inside the advanced options in this lesson, the only thing that you're going to want to adjust is the shutter angle for motion blur. So for example, if I want more of a motion blur, let's just say we want to crank that shutter angle up to be 720, and I'm simply going to say OK, and you can see now that we have a lot more motion blur than we had before. What I'm going to do, just fit this to the window. I'm going to hit the space bar again, and you can see that that motion blur is really in there. Very cool. Okay, and again, obviously the amount of motion blur will vary based on your needs. I'm just going to set this back to be like 180, which is pretty much the standard for motion blur. There we go. Not too much. Okay, now I think there's one more thing that I want to talk about in this lesson when it comes to basic animation. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add a couple keyframes because I want to make a slight adjustment to this animation. What I actually want the animation to do is to start right here, okay? Now, at this location, I want to add a keyframe, but there doesn't seem to be a way for me to do it. I could come over here and I could turn my little stopwatch off. The only problem is by doing that, I've actually removed all of the keyframes from that position parameter. So that's not what I want to do. What I actually want to do is just head right over here to the left of that, to the little diamond icon that looks surprisingly enough a lot like a keyframe. And I'm simply going to add a keyframe by just clicking on that little diamond icon. Now, what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to add another one right here, because what we're going to do is just simply remove the first and last keyframe where this started off frame, and we're just going to drag this right back to the end, and we're going to drag this one right back to the beginning. I'm holding shift so that it snaps to the start and the end, and now you'll see that if I come back and hit the space bar, there's my animation. Okay? But here's what I want to talk about. I always talk about realism when it comes to doing effects work inside of After Effects. Well, let's use a car driving as an example. Well, if I gave you the keys to a car and you got in a car and you stepped on the gas and I said, I need you to go, 100 miles an hour, or whatever speed, the car's not just going to go from 0 and, snap its finger and be going, 100 miles an hour. It's going to slowly ramp into that. And if I say, okay, I need you to come to a stop, you're not going to step on the brake and that car's just not going to come to a screeching stop in half a second. It's obviously going to slowly ramp down over time. Well, inside of After Effects, we have the ability to add those type of keyframe parameters, and to get in and access them is very simple. All I'm going to do is simply select one of the keyframes. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to navigate down to the Keyframe Assistance, and the two that I'm going to talk about right here are Easy Ease In and Easy Ease Out. Now, most people think that on the first keyframe that I'm going to add an Easy Ease In, and on the second keyframe I'd add an Easy Ease Out. Well, I'm not going to, because what's important to keep in mind is that with this, I want to ease out of a keyframe and I want to ease into a keyframe. So for a keyframe that I have right here at the beginning, what I actually want to do is I want to do an Easy Ease Out, just like that. What I'm going to do here, and you'll notice that the icon has actually changed. It's now no longer that diamond icon. It's actually a little bit of an arrow icon. What I'm going to do is jump right down to the end. I'm going to go to the Keyframe Assistant, and I'm going to say, okay, Keyframe Assistant, we're going to Easy Ease into this keyframe. You'll see there's that arrow now pointing to the right. Now if I come back, you'll see that if I actually drag, take a look at that. The keyframe now, instead of just starting and going full speed, it actually ramps into it. You'll see we have no motion blur, and it ramps into it. And then it eases into this last keyframe to come to a stop. So if I now simply hit the space bar, you'll see there it goes, ramping into the effect or easing out of that keyframe and then easing into this keyframe at the end to come to a stop. Very cool. Okay, now we could obviously go super in-depth into animating keyframes, but the purpose of this lesson is just to get you started to create some very basic animations in After Effects. Now, in our next lesson, we're going to talk about the one thing that you really need to know about, and that is text creation inside of After Effects. I'm going to show you how simple it is to create text. Then I'm going to show you the actual amount of depth that you can get in when creating text, as well as creating 3D true extruded text inside of Adobe's After Effects. And then I'm going to show you how you can get in and utilize some very cool built-in text animation presets inside of After Effects to really get you going and get the creative juices flowing so that you can have something to show your client lightning quick. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, or you have any tutorial requests, you can send them to kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.